All right, Gran, let's talk.
All right, let's talk. Let me see. I am so happy to know of your interest in genealogy. Nobody else in the family has expressed much interest in it. They were too polite not to listen, if I wound up about it every now and then. But you're the one that really wants to do it. So, well, I guess they're coming back. A group of us in Louisville decided that we would like to know more about our ancestry. For example, I did not know my grandmother's maiden name. I didn't know when she was born. I didn't know much about my grandfather. Now that's one generation back from my father and me.
It's really easy to lose track.
Yeah, it is.
Quickly.
It really is. And you're busy with other things, and you think, I don't have time to listen to that. Even when somebody wanted to talk about it, I wasn't too interested.
Yeah.
But we decided we'd see if we could educate ourselves. So we have a library there, and we have access to libraries in other small towns around. And we have the State Archives in Atlanta and the State Historical Library. So we had places we could go to find out things if we just had the will to do it. So we organized into the Louisville Genealogical Society and chose that as our name, and had a slogan, which I have forgotten, that goes along with it. But we soon found there was more interest in it than we had realized. And we decided to meet every 2 weeks and have a speaker. We search for people knowledgeable about genealogy and invite them to come and speak to us once a month. At the end of 2 weeks, have a speaker. Then at the end of the next 2 weeks, we get together and have some sort of a program just among our members. What do you know? Where do you like to go? And so on. And we just started off really well, organized. I was one of the early presidents of that group, and it was so much fun that we almost didn't want to do anything else. We waited for those days to come and shared what we had found with our friends, and then we began to focus on, well, which ones were engaged in some of the many wars that Georgia was involved in, and how would we share that with other people? We decided that we would start writing things down as we found them out, so that we wouldn't say, well, I did know something one time, but I've forgotten what it was. We would be more logical about our record keeping. So we started keeping notebooks labeled according to the family name that we were pursuing. And we soon found that we were accumulating more about those people than we ever had dreamed possible. And we focused at first upon the American Revolution, because everybody's interested in that. And we thought if we could just get back that far with our own families, it would be wonderful. At that time, we didn't know how many organizations there were that were interested in helping people find their ancestry. There was the Daughters of the American Revolution, that was the biggie, and there was the United Daughters of the Confederacy, which involved most of us since we were Georgians, and there were various other ones, the War of 1812, and the Spanish-American War, and then World War II, and so on, and developed a filing system for each one of those by name, and shared what we found with the others. And we soon had burgeoning amounts of information about the names we were pursuing. Somebody said once, I resent the time that I have to go to work or that I have to do the dishes, or I have to sew or clean house. I just want to do this all the time. Well, that's not possible, but that was our feeling. So I focused first upon the American Revolution, and the big organization for women is the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution. We tried it first some time ago. No, shouldn't say we. A group of women wanted to join the Sons of the American Revolution. Let us just join as women. They didn't want to let women in. And we said, all right, we'll form our own organization. And we did, the DAR. And we soon outgrew them by far, because the men were just kind of doing it as a lark.
Social club?
Yeah, a social group to meet and talk about it. But women were saying, okay, let's get organized. Let's find out as much as we can. And we did. And I developed a file on each of the members as I found them of my family that had fought in the American Revolution. But we had to get there first. So we went to the libraries and we looked up as much information as we could find upon this group, that group, another group. And I settled upon, finally, the 10 I could find in my ancestry that were in the American Revolution. And it was so interesting. I've developed a page and a half, I think, on one group, and I meant to bring that to you, and it didn't get in my suitcase somehow.
No problem.
But it will. I'm going to send it to you. It's about a young man named Daniel Carmichael. I believe that he was Irish. I'm pretty sure he was. His father was also named Daniel. There was obviously a Daniel Carmichael that was older than the other one. And they had to be father and son, we thought, because they were of the right age to be that relationship. Daniel was conscripted before the war ended, and he knew that he was going to have to go fight. And he told his two brothers, James and John, if I don't come back from this war, this is what I want you to do for my family and for me. He said, this is my will that I'm talking to you about now. And it's called a non-cupative will, one that is developed from sources that you talk about or find out about and share, not in an organized way with your relatives, friends, people in the community, and so on. And so he shared with his brothers what he wanted them to do, and sure enough, he didn't come back. And information came that a young man named Daniel Carmichael had lost his horse and blanket. And that was pretty serious, because they were traveling on just a shoestring, providing their own horses.
I wanted you to see that she's got a lot of red. Where's Brandy?
Let's take time out for this. She's scratching too, honey.
She's just been bathed.
There are some illnesses that always start with a rash and an itch. I think one of them is measles, and one is chicken pox. And they're shared by children in daycare centers,
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on it.
playgrounds, and so on. So
We
I
were
guess
cleaning with some supplies yesterday, and she was helping, so I think she got like some pine sol on her. I thought it might be the pine sol or something like that, but we'll see.
Yeah.
And then if she keeps crawling around on the floors or something like that, she might be getting it.
yeah, that's true.
So that would be my thought, but we'll keep an eye on it, make sure she's okay.
Well, she sure is scratching, and it's popping out more, isn't it?
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Matt was allergic to pine,
Oh,
and I'm sure that Walgreens is open. Should I get her jammies on?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Well, want me to go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So he talked to his two brothers about it, James and John, and they said, "Don't worry, we'll take care of it. We'll take care of your family, and we'll do what you want us to do with your valuables and your land and your home and everything. It'll be just as you say." And they took notes about that. Sure enough, he didn't come back and didn't come back, and word finally came that he had lost his life in the war. And that was in, along the coast. They were all from Pennsylvania, but he had been called to war along the Atlantic coast. And they set down a form of the will and the way he had talked to them about it. I want this child to go live with his Uncle John. I want this daughter to go live with her uncle, whatever the other one was, William, whatever. And I want my three youngest to stay with their mother, because they're too little to be split off from their siblings. And he apportioned his assets, so many pounds to this child, so many to this one, so many to another, and disposed of all his assets in the will, in the spoken will. They were ahead of their times because not many took the trouble to do that before they went to war. They expected to come back, but he really didn't. He had a premonition that he would not be returning. So I have that, and that was what I was going to bring. I had typed it up. I'll send it to you.
Go on, I'd love to read it.
Okay.
Can you tell me about kind of your childhood and go back from there, perhaps? So I'd love to. Maybe that's the wrong way to look at it because it's the easier information to find, but I'm kind of most interested in your life and your parents and I guess your grandparents and kind of where you came from and what they did and stuff like that. Some of the stuff that we talked about last time you were in.
Maybe we should start with my grandparents then.
Sure.
Of whom I had 4.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. On the Stone side, which was my maiden name, my father was a gay young blade. He really was. He was about 34 or 35 when he married, but he had the first car in Fitzgerald, the little southern town that I was born into. And he drove around town in his little car and flirted with the girls, dated most of them. But as he got older, he got more and more serious. He didn't engage in that kind of frivolity very much once he got married. So anyway, he had a farm. He came from a farm. Everybody that didn't live in town engaged in farming. And they shared their farming knowledge and sometimes their seeds, and they helped each other with their crops in rotation and so on. So it was a very small but vibrant community. And I'm talking about my father, right?
Right.
So he missed the wars. Somehow he wasn't of the age that was being called for each of the wars that happened. But his parents were farmers, and he was one of 12 children that lived to adulthood. They had big, big families, and they needed them because they needed a lot of hands on the farm. And it was a pretty good way of life. It didn't provide much money, but it provided a living. They lived off the produce of the farms, and got married in turn and got some land from their parents or bought some on their own, and just stayed a tight little group. My grandfather's name was Philip Stone, and my father's name was Roland Stone. Roland, and he gave himself an initial because everybody always said, "What is your middle name?" Well, I don't have one, but I'll just give you an initial. Roland O. Stone. And that's the way he always signed his name. And he married this lovely young lady, my mother, who was from Alabama. They had migrated to Georgia because Alabama was enduring a mini depression. That grandfather, worked for a sawmill. He didn't own it, but he worked for it. And things were so bad that around 1900 and a little beyond that, the grandparents migrated from Alabama to Georgia. And he went to work for a sawmill there. People didn't live very long then because life was too hard. My grandfather died at the great-grandfather died at the age of 56 of a heart attack. And one of his children died shortly after birth. But they went on, and the older brothers got jobs and supported the widowed mother and her daughter, my mother, Daisy Frances Reese Stone. So that takes care of the first generation or two. But the Stones are my first name. And then we began to question members of the family, uncles and aunts and sometimes cousins. What else do you know about the family? They'd say, well, I know that this uncle did so-and-so, and this one got killed in a war, and this one got killed in some accident happening at the sawmill, and so on. And I wrote all of that down, kept a log on the family. And from there, I went to the generation before that, and I had to go to libraries to get that information, and found that the next generation carried on the family names and left some information from tax records and from obituaries and from Bible records, which were a wonderful source of information. If you had a Bible record, that was as good as a spoken record with somebody sitting down telling you about it, because nobody questioned what was written in the Bible. And that was just a wonderful find.
In the Bible?
In the Bible.
Where would they write it in the Bible?
Usually in Bibles, I know now, and for years and years, there'd been a group of pages in the center that were blank. It said family Bible record, or death record, or birth records, and marriage records. And you would copy those down, either by hand or by copies from the Bible. And you always, if you took something from a book, you turned inside to the first few pages, and the first one you came to that told you the name of the Bible and the date it was written and printed, and so identified your source. That was really imperative. Write down the source. Now somebody's going to say, where did you get this? Well, I talked to my grandfather, and I got this notated before notary public, or I have a Bible record. The Bible record was sacrosanct. Nobody could dispute that, because nobody would deliberately falsify a Bible record. And you just develop that kind of information all along from each family and kept it in a binder or notebook by itself. And you'd be surprised how fast your information grew. And every spare moment that you had available, you looked up more information. You went to the sources where you can find something. The ones I've mentioned, the state records or the national records or letters from one person to another, and you began to find that they overlapped to some extent. People married into another group and that they were your family records too. And you soon had 10, 20, maybe 30 people that you were following. It's just, when you met with other people that were doing genealogy, they'd say, I don't want to do anything else. I hate having to stay home and wash dishes and take care of the family. I just want to go to the library and do this.
It's passion, huh?
Just so interesting, but you can't do that. You have to go on with your job too.
Yeah.
Now, I have followed, I haven't counted them up, but I have followed maybe 20 lines intensively and have thick folders on them. I have a lot of duplication in the folder because I've copied every single scrap of information, even if it duplicated something that I already had from another source. So there is a lot of duplication, but you can decide for yourself if you want to write a story or a chapter or a book about your family, then you can decide, well, I won't use this one because this one is a better source.
Yeah,
and
makes
you put
sense.
it together. Now,
And it adds validity to each source that you do use.
that's right.
Yeah.
And you find that one bears witness to what some other source said,
Sure.
or it doesn't, and then you have a problem. Well, I'll just use both of them, but say this one does not agree with this one. So I'm going with this one.
Sure.
So I'm just so apologetic that I didn't get that into my suitcase so that
That's
I could
okay.
leave that with you. I don't know how I'm going to get all that to you, honey. I can make copies. I can make copies on my own computer when it's working. It doesn't always work, but either that or the library or the Genealogy Society itself. I can make copies for you and let you decide how you want to organize yours, honey.
Sure.
But
My thought would be, my dad could likely, if you have it computerized, my dad should be able to help with that kind of stuff. Or I
okay,
can. And it shouldn't be very hard if it's already digitized.
right.
Yeah.
And you might find some new sources.
Sure.
And
be
you
able to-
find, okay, very often they have moved to another state.
Sure.
And then you go to that state and look at their records. Or you write letters to the state librarian or the clerk of the courthouse. Say, this is what I need to know. Can you help me? And some will say, I was glad to find this for you. There's no charge. Others will say, I charge $25 to look up something on a name. But you want it so badly, you're willing to pay
Sure.
whatever they say. It's like finding gold. You want to document that.
You know what I was wondering, if you could take it to Doug's when you go at Christmas and Doug could digitize it and send it to Drew.
He could, yes. Or family by family, I could give you the most pertinent information, honey, on each one. I just chose the Carmichaels because they were interesting.
Sure.
They wound up in Tennessee. The wife, the widow, wound up marrying another man and moving to Tennessee. But I have a record of his name, where they lived, and so on. So I followed them.
That's interesting.
You mean at the computer?
Was that a common thing to get remarried after becoming a widow?
No, I can't do that
Yes,
today.
it was, because
We'll have
women
to do
didn't
that
have
when we
much
have
of a
that
source of
time.
income,
We're
honey.
going to have to leave pretty soon.
So they
I
pretty
thought it was
much-
like
We have to
kind of
leave
get
pretty soon.
brought into the deceased husband's family or something like that.
Yes, right. And women and men probably had several young children too, and they
Yeah.
didn't have anybody to take care of them. So they needed a mate as well. So there were often remarriages.
Daddy's doing that of Gran.
Yeah,
What you doing, Daddy?
we're recording Graham. Gran's telling us about our family.
She's found us.
Gotta listen to Gran telling us about our family.
Does that give you some inkling of what's involved, honey?
Yeah. I don't know really the questions to ask. I just find it all really interesting.
Tell Drew about life during the Depression. I think he would find that very interesting.
Oh, dear. Yeah. It was very hard times, honey. It really was. Nobody had much money. Most people were farmers in the South. Things got very bad, but they always had food from the farm, so they managed. My father used to say that for a while he'd cleared maybe $300 or $400 a year, and we ate off the farm. But he soon saw that he couldn't educate his 3 children on $300 or $400 a year, so he sold his farm. And he said, "Oh my God, I hated to do that so, because it had been part of his father's land."
Just a second.
He said, "But I saw that I was not going to be able to educate my children."
Oh,
And that was
wait a minute.
number one with him.
Be still, because you're
That he sent his children to school and even to college if he possibly could. So that's what he did. And
So what did he
old
do?
were you?
What did he do instead?
what, honey?
What did he do instead of farming?
He built a filling station in town, and he had worked for an oil company as a salesman, so he knew something of the business, and he chose that. So he put up a filling station and stayed there through World War II, honey, and did very well.
Nice.
But it was a very hard life.
So was it a filling station that was also like parked garage where he would repair cars, or just provide gasoline?
I don't think he did that, except maybe incidentally for a friend.
Gotcha.
But most of it was from sales of oil and, maybe tires. He fixed tires sometimes,
Gotcha.
things like that. But he worked until he was just worn out at the filling station. Hired a man, and maybe the man did well and stayed with him a long time, or maybe he left the next week and said, "I don't want to do this anymore." So it was kind of nip and tuck for a while.
Do you see there's a hole in my ear?
People worked in groceries,
That's so I can
or
hear
they
this.
worked on farms, or they worked for sawmills, or they worked in various other little
Still not going back.
capacities in their hometown.
Gotcha. What about your mother?
My mothers were always housewives. They may have supplemented by working a few days in a store downtown during the week and bringing their money home to buy groceries or buy clothing for their children and so on. But it was tough old times.
Is that what your mother did?
What, honey?
Is that what your mother did?
Yes, she was always a housewife. After she married, she never worked outside the home again.
Did she make your clothes?
Oh, yes, she did. And when I was about 12 or 14, I said, I would like to try making a dress. And she showed me how to put the pattern on the fabric, cut around it, what size to buy, and so on. And I put it together myself and sewed it on the sewing machine.
What did it look like?
It didn't look too good.
No? Well, what was the pattern?
I don't know.
You don't remember?
And it was always cotton material. That's all we had to work with.
Sure.
Couldn't afford silk and so on, or wool. I had some families that were very wealthy. They were Northerners. I know one was the Hollingsworths, and every now and then you will see a reference to somebody Hollingsworth. They're kin to us way back there somewhere, because that name is very prominent, and they left records everywhere about everything. I would like to send you information about them. Had a big family. I traced that line because it was so well written up. And, you know, Doug has 2 children, girls. One of, well, they all are descended Doug is descended, and his girls are descended from those Hollingsworths. And I'd never known that or heard anything about them. They had flour mills, Flour,
Yeah.
and they had numerous engagements in battles. They were well known. There's a Hollingsworth Society, of which I'm not a member, but I could be when I presented my
So just a prominent family name.
proof, yes.
Now, Mike is not one, is he? Is Mike descended from Hollingsworth?
Certainly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I believe, wait a minute, honey, let me think. No, he would not be.
Oh,
But on
How
my
would
side,
how would Doug's family be, but not Mike's family?
that's a good question,
He
honey.
would have to be, right?
Yeah, he would be.
Unless his girls got it from Aunt Ellen.
No, they got it from me.
So
on my
it would-
side.
It would have to be the same, I would think.
So they were. I hadn't thought
or
about
maybe
that.
it's not for boys.
No. It's for anybody with a Hollingsworth name,
Oh.
honey. And so Mike would have that in his heritage, too. I hadn't even thought about that. I was so interested in my own side.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I bet Drew would find it interesting, the story of how Fitzgerald, Georgia, where you grew up, how that town was founded.
Okay. I have made many talks
I know
about
you
that.
have.
Let's see. The Civil War really left the South in shambles. If anybody had any money, it was lost during the Civil War. Buying enough food to keep body and soul together. The men were all gone. They were fighting in the army. Many did not come back, or they came back so wounded and damaged that they couldn't work. So I had 4 great-grandfathers and 1 great-grandfather who served in the Civil War. At that age, they went off to war and fought on the losing side. And the South was left. They said the days of Reconstruction were worse economically on the South than the war itself was. And that was true.
So how does Fitzgerald play into that?
Okay. 30 years after the Civil War, a man from Indianapolis had been a national fighter, had belonged to the Union Army, and he saw that his neighbors were having a hard time with a depression in Indianapolis and having trouble getting a job and having trouble for providing for their families and so on. And he thought, we need to move to the South where it's warmer, we have a better climate, we have better job opportunities, we've saved our money, maybe we can buy some land and send for our families and live down there. Well, that's what they did. He came down, looked around Fitzgerald, because there was a lot of land just lying fertile. Nobody could buy it because they didn't have any money. And people were glad to sell it for a price and go somewhere else to live. They didn't know that they would not be very welcome. There was rather harsh treatment of Yankees in the South after suffering through the war. So that's what he did. And they came en masse to the South, bought some land, parceled it off, developed a town 1 mile square, and sold those squares of land to people from Indianapolis that wanted to move south. And they did. They came, some of them on foot, some of them on horse, some of them in wagon trains, sometimes on trains as far as the train ran, but then traveled the rest of the way however they could get there. and developed their little square of land. It was laid off in perfect squares. Moved their families, and there they were in the heart of Dixie, amid all the former Confederate soldiers and their families. And my father said, oh, people treated them all right, but it was a qualified all right. They were not very neighborly at first. And as time went by, their children began to intermarry. They went to church together, and it wasn't right to carry the fight into the church. So it became slowly one community. And they all soon began not to think of themselves individually, but to see themselves collectively as a city. And there was a blue-gray museum, and what was the name of the hotel? A great big hotel built with government money. It was the first government loan for erecting a building. And
Anywhere or in Fitzgerald?
I'm sorry.
Anywhere or in Fitzgerald?
No, not just Fitzgerald, anywhere. One of the first communities to have a library furnished with public funds. And I think, what was the name of the man that provided the money for the library? He was a wealthy man, and he saw that they didn't have any resources, hardly. And he said, I will build you a library. And until just recent years, that library was well used. I used to go there and just read books and check out books every weekend, especially in the summer when I didn't have lessons to do from the public schools.
When did your father move there, do you know? To Fitzgerald?
Well, my father was born in 1885 in a county adjacent to where Fitzgerald was. And my mother was born in Alabama in 1896, and they moved about shortly after 1900 to Fitzgerald, and as soon late in the teens, 1918, 1920, they were married. My dad born in 1885, my mother in 1896. Yeah.
And so they married. What year did they marry?
When did they?
Marry?
They married in 1990, 1918, I believe,
1918.
honey.
And you were born in?
I was born in 1923.
Okay.
I had a baby brother who died at the age of about a week. He didn't live. And then I was
What was his name? What was his name?
Roland O. Stone Jr. My father said he had to fight his way up with his friends all through childhood and boyhood. They said, Rolling Stone, gathers no moss. He heard that all the time. They thought they were so clever when they'd say that. Rolling Stone, gathers no moss. He
Good
said,
name.
that's not my name, I'm Roland. And he probably called him a bad name, and then they had a fight.
So you then had more siblings. You have several sisters.
Yes, I had two, what am I trying to say? Two sisters that were younger than I. One was born in, well, I was 12 and she was 10, and our baby sister was born when we were those ages. And that's all the members of my family.
So your mother was from Alabama. You've tracked her family back a bit too?
Some, yes. She was a Reese, R-E-E-C-E. So I've done a lot of work on that family.
And Where did they come from originally?
In the northeastern part. Now the Reeses were Quakers. They came over with William Penn's group from Wales late in, or early, I will say, in the 1700s and settled in counties around New York. Chester County, Pennsylvania, that was the main place that they settled, I believe. And they just came in their rickety ships across the Atlantic Ocean and banded together when they got to the it wasn't even called the United States, I don't guess, but to the
Colonies?
Colonies, yes. And they...
But some of that gets far enough back where, I mean, those were Indian lands at that time.
What?
Those were Indian lands at that time, weren't they? Early 1700s?
They were just colonies.
Yeah.
They weren't states.
Have you encountered any interaction with any of the research you've done on our ancestors with Indians at the time in those areas? Conflict or anything like that?
Not specifically, but there were Indians around.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They moved away. My people, from whom I'm directly descended, moved away from that area shortly after they came. But they moved in a group and joined a Quaker group farther south.
Mm-hmm.
So, want to know some of the other names, if I
Sure.
can recall them?
Sure. I'd like to hear any. I don't know the good questions to ask, so feel free to just talk about anything that's interesting.
I know. There were the Hollingsworths that were prosperous,
Uh-huh.
owned flour mills, were northern. There were the Carmichaels. There were Donaldsons. Donaldson was a good name in the South. John Donaldson came on a flatboat down from Virginia with all his possessions and his family members on a flatboat to Tennessee and became a politician. I forget what he was, but settled in Tennessee. And I have some information on them. And one of the women that was in my family married a Donaldson, and supposedly he beat his wife, and she got a divorce from him, which was almost unheard of.
When was this?
Yeah.
When was it?
I can't tell you without looking it up, honey. But it was a great scandal.
Was it?
Yes.
Good for her.
Yeah. She said, I'm not going to take this anymore. And they got a divorce. She got a divorce. Now, who else do I have? And every folder is about that thick. I thought, what can I do? How am I going to get all this to him? Probably I will select the most helpful information out of it to send you.
Sure.
And the documented information.
It'd be interesting to read through. It's probably hard to make heads or tails of until you've read the first couple of books and you can start cross-referencing things.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And always get that title page from a book.
Yeah.
So you can say,
You can go
this
after
is where I
yourself.
found it.
Yeah.
If you want to read more, go to find this book.
So, you were talking about the stone line. Where did they come from originally?
I couldn't get them back that far. Records were often incomplete, had been lost, falsified. Somebody put down what he thought happened. But others are well documented. What was your direct question?
Where are the stones from?
We think they came to Georgia along the coast, probably, maybe North Carolina, this is supposition, from England, they may have stopped at stopping places along the coast. And that's all I know. I've never been able to take them back to the land they came from. But they spoke English. Some of them came not speaking English. And the information on them is scanty indeed, because those recording that information didn't know what to put down, didn't know how to spell it.
Yeah.
There was one census taker that didn't know how to spell his own name. So you know he
That's
wasn't
not
very
helpful.
much good at documenting.
Yeah. Now, a lot of those early colonists were indentured.
Or what?
Indentured, like they would get their passage over to the colonies paid
Yes.
for years of service when they arrived. Did you encounter any of that in your...
I didn't
So
encounter
that's pretty
that.
far back, I guess.
Yeah. Well, one of my lines at least were Quakers again, and they left Wales late in 1600 and came with William Penn in his group of ships called the Welcome Group. I could belong to the Welcome Society if I had wanted to join it, but I thought I can't join everything in the world, so I'm not going to do that.
Sure.
But they absolutely came with him to Penn's Woods, now Pennsylvania, and they signed Penn's Great Charter. Their names, some of the names are on his Penn's Great Charter, which is kept in a very hallowed place in their records. Oh, that little sweetie's gone to sleep. Tired, honey? Are you tired? Okay.
Why did William Penn come to the States? Was it a religious thing?
Yes, it was pretty much.
So some of that,
He was
the other
wealthy.
people would be joining him for religious purposes to come over.
Yes, they did.
Okay.
They were not well treated in Wales. They would not bow down when a member of royalty passed by. Their lands were taken away from them in Wales. They couldn't find employment because people didn't like them. They were very narrow in their religious outlook on things. And so at last they got tired of being abused and property taken away. They said, let's go. William Penn came along and said, I have money. I will pay your way. And he joined little groups that wanted to come to the New World, and they came with him to Pennsylvania and still kept their Quaker affiliation. They called each other thee and thou. They had meetings, but their outlook on life was so different from people around them that people withdrew from them, didn't like them very much.
I think today we'd call them a cult, wouldn't we?
I think you probably would.
And they would be completely ostracized for being weird.
There's still a few Quaker groups, though.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and they're
Yeah.
fairly established. I'm just saying, if something like that took hold today, it would be a cult, and everyone would
Yes.
point fingers and be.
Look down on them and
Not much has changed.
beat them up.
Yeah.
Take away their property.
Not want to employ them. Yeah. Not much has changed. It's crazy to think of.
But sometimes in their meeting groups, it was said of Quakers that they had one foot in the meeting house and one in the counting house, the bank. They worked hard. They were usually well educated, but they had their money taken away and people beat them up. So they didn't have totally an easy time when they got here. And I saw a record once where a man had been dismissed from a Quaker meeting for communing with Methodists. Maybe he was just talking with them, was friends with them, but he was kicked out of the meeting house.
So you went to college,
Yes.
and your family paid your way.
Oh, yes.
Tell me about that. How
Three
old
of
were
us.
you?
3 of us in a row.
How old were you when you went to college?
I was 16.
Oh, wow.
In
Was that
Georgia.
early at the time?
Well, I started at school when I was 5. My birthday was in November, as you probably know.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother said, "How old is this child?" And my mother wanted me to go to school. I guess she wanted to get rid of me. I don't know. My mother said, "She's nearly 6." I was 6 in November. And they said, "Okay, we'll take her." And they didn't. And so I graduated. At that time, Georgia did not have enough money to finance 12 years of schooling. They had enough for 11. So I went to an 11th grade school and got out when I was 16 and entered college in the fall when I was 16 and graduated from college at 20.
Where did you go to college?
I went to the Georgia State College for Women, and that was in Milledgeville, Georgia. And Milledgeville had been one of the early capitals, state capitals of Georgia. If you want me to digress a minute, and I learned this from my sister, there were 5 capitals, have been 5 capitals of Georgia, which is my home state, beginning with S, a little town called Selma. No, that's not right. That's not right. I forget what it was beginning with, but it started with an S. And the next one was A. And I think that was Augusta, maybe.
Okay.
And the next was L. There's a Louisville, they call it. They pronounce the S, Louisville, Georgia. That was the 3rd one. S-A-L. Milledgeville was the state capital, and the last was Atlanta, Selma.
Okay.
I think
That makes sense, yeah.
S-A-L-M-A.
Is Atlanta still the capital?
Atlanta's still the capital. Yeah.
So you went to college, it was in Millersville? Is that what you said? Millersville.
Yeah.
So you lived away from home,
Oh, yes.
starting at 16?
Yes.
How was that? Was that crazy to
It
transition?
was fun, yes.
Was it?
I couldn't wait to get away from home. I tried to cool that.
Tell me about it.
It was the strictest college that you can ever imagine. It was girls only. I thought briefly about going to the University of Georgia. No, there are boys there.
Who said no?
My father. I want you to go to a girls' school. Well, that was that. I knew better than to argue with my dad.
Yeah.
So he sent me to a girls' school, 4 years of school, 4 years in school. And I graduated from there at 20 and got a first job and got married and led a routine life.
Seems like you're skipping over a lot of fun times in college, or you're fast forwarding through them. Tell me about it. What did you do? You made a lot of friends in college?
Yeah, I did. Had a good time.
Did you? What did you study?
My grades reflected that too.
What did you study when you were in college?
I didn't want to be a teacher, which is funny because that's what I became. And I didn't want to be a nurse because I didn't like the idea of taking care of sick people
Sure.
and seeing a lot of blood and bad things. So I became a business major and graduated with a BS in business education, I believe it was called. And I was certified to teach business subjects in high school, which I never did.
So when you were in college with your friends, what would you do for fun?
We stayed on campus. We weren't allowed to leave the
Were you not?
campus.
So what did you do on campus? Book clubs?
Yeah, book clubs and maybe dance groups with other girls, dull things. However, 30 miles away in Macon was an airfield, and soldiers came over there on weekends and walked all over the campus and introduced themselves and dated the girls. The girls were very happy with that arrangement.
Yeah. Did you date some airmen?
Well, I sure did. Yeah.
Did they have like chaperone dances and stuff like that?
Yes.
And was that fun?
Highly chaperoned.
Highly chaperoned?
But we could not leave the campus. It was a small town.
Yeah. Is there any particularly memorable airmen that you recollect?
Well, I don't want to go into that, honey.
Okay, you're fine.
I had some that I really liked,
That's interesting.
but that's as far as it went. They could come over, we'd walk around the campus, I'd go down in the recreation hall that was beneath the dormitories, and go with the date and stay until the bell rang for them to go home.
I think we're needing to go pretty soon.
Okay.
We're supposed to pick Holly up about 8.
Ava has a booger. Ava, there's some Kleenex right there, honey. Right here, on top of the...
And her tissue.
Right there.
Okay. Well, we'll sweeten it up a little bit. So after you got out of college, how did you meet my grandfather?
He lived in Fitzgerald.
Okay.
We went to high school together, but we never dated. We didn't pay any attention to each other.
Did you know each other in high school?
Yeah.
Just friendly, but didn't really know each other?
Yeah, didn't really know each other. I don't think he dated much, and I didn't either. I was too young. My parents wouldn't have approved my dating at 15.
So you moved back to Fitzgerald after college, and then when did you start seeing him again?
Let's see, honey. Let me think. I remember working 2 years after I'd been in college. He was coming home from working in the shops at Fitzgerald. He went to Georgia Tech and graduated from there finally. And our paths crossed. And we stopped and chatted a few minutes, and he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going to college in Milledgeville." He said, "Well, I'm going to Georgia Tech," which I already knew. But he said, "How about a date this weekend?" And I said, "Okay." And 2 weeks later, he proposed.
Oh my God.
So fast.
Wow.
Unlike his son.
Or grandson.
And I said, "I cannot possibly agree to marry you after seeing you for 2 weeks." He said, "Well, when will you let me know?" I said, "By the end of the summer." That was 1942.
Oh.
He said, "All right." So at the end of the summer, I began to shake in my boots, and I thought, "Oh, I've committed myself to doing something here."
And you were still dating? You were still dating that whole summer?
Yeah, 3 times a week.
What would you guys do on a date?
We saw a lot of sorry movies.
Yeah.
And sometimes we would date another couple and go out somewhere. I knew the places not to go.
I think you should put that on.
What was the place not to go?
They were called log cabins, and 2 of them. And they sold alcohol there. My father said, "I better not hear of you going there." And that was enough. I was easy to keep in line. So I didn't go to the log cabins. And at the end of the summer, he said, "Now you're supposed to give me an answer to a question." I said, "Oh, that's right."
Upside down.
Oh, I had forgotten.
She's got it on upside down.
You got it upside down. We got to start again.
I didn't know
She
what to
probably
say.
couldn't read that until it's been washed.
I said, halfway kind of committed, I don't know what to say. I said, "My answer is yes."
And when did you guys get married?
Well, World War II came along, honey. And in the fall, Dad left school. He was conscripted. He had joined, what do you call it?
ROTC.
ROTC, was paid for meeting.
It's gonna be so
His
hot.
name came up, and he was called up to the Army. So that put aside any
Any plans? Yeah.
plans I had. He said, "Well, when I come back, I'm going to come back and we'll get married." I said, "Okay."
When did he come back?
He came back in 1946. And 1 week later, we were married.
Where did he serve in World War II?
Oh, you
He went to Europe, honey, and he was in England for a while, and then he was in France, and then he was in the Battle of the Bulge, and then he joined. The war was hot and heavy,
Yeah.
but it was being lost by the Germans. They just weren't giving up. They were fighting to the bitter end, and he fought all over Germany, France and Germany.
Feels like a horsey.
It was tough.